Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 723 for September 9th, 2018. Coming up in a few minutes.
We set out to make America's next great bourbon, and we've been working towards that goal from the beginning, and never did we say we're building this company to sell it. That just simply hasn't been a goal of ours. But I think we've achieved a level of excellence with our whiskey now that drew some attention, and we were more than happy to entertain any and all options. And I think as we grew, we just take this one step at a time. The one hurdle that we faced that we were having a tough time getting past is the distribution element.
We were really brought together on the people front first between us and Wyoming, and they're really great people with the same value set we have about giving back to society over the long term. And that's where the discussion began, really.
Another Scotch whiskey giant is getting into the American whiskey business. Edrington, the owner of the Macallan, Highland Park, and other major Scotch whiskey and spirits brands, is teaming up with Wyoming Whiskey in a strategic partnership that includes a minority ownership stake. It's the latest in a series of tie-ups between major spirits companies and small-scale American distillers. We'll break down the deal on WhiskyCast In-Depth with Wyoming Whiskey's David DeFazio and Edrington America's CEO, Chris Spalding. That's just ahead, along with the calendar of events, your voice, the What I'm Tasting This Week department, and much more, all on this edition of WhiskyCast.
WhiskyCast, brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot-still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
This is whiskey, Johnny Walker's Scotch whiskey, from this place and these people, Scotch makers, creating the bold and complex flavour of Johnny Walker Black Label. Step right up.
Let's get started with the news. It's brought to you by Highland Park. The Kentucky Bourbon Festival gets underway this Wednesday in Bardstown, and there's a storm cloud hovering over this year's festival. Not because of Hurricane Florence, which could hit the U.S. East Coast at the end of this week and potentially bring heavy rains to Kentucky by the weekend. The storm cloud does have a strike, though, and it's not a lightning strike. Workers at Four Roses Distillery in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky, and its Cox's Creek maturation and bottling site went on strike Friday afternoon. 53 members of the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, Locals 10D and 23D, along with Local 320 of the National Conference of Firemen and Oilers, rejected management's final contract offer, with only 2 votes in favor of accepting the deal. The unions represent operations and maintenance workers at both sites, along with the workers who run the distillery's boiler and water treatment systems. Local 10D President Jeff Royalty told us Saturday from the picket line that the dispute is not over money. His members want to preserve vacation time, sick leave, and seniority rights that had been part of their contracts for 30 years, while fighting the distillery's plans to implement a 2-tier wage scale for new hires.
I will be the first to say we made some headway. We found some common ground on a lot of issues, but as I tell people, we got real close, but just not quite there. And, the company gave me a last, best, and final and told me this is what it's going to be. And just because this negotiation is, we've met a total of 9 times, if I'm not mistaken. And for 30 years, this had been just like a 2-day event. We'd meet a couple times. Everything was just nice and cordial, and we found common ground. Well, this one kind of got, for lack of better terms, just a little nasty.
Four Roses Chief Operating Officer Ryan Ashley declined to be interviewed, but told us in an email that the Kirin Holdings-owned distillery hopes to resolve the dispute, quote, amicably and swiftly. The strike will not have any impact on production right away, since the distillery itself is shut down right now, while final work on a $55 million expansion project is in its final stages, and bottling line workers at Cox's Creek are not union members. However, the strike could have a major impact on this week's Kentucky Bourbon Festival. Four Roses will host its annual Let's Talk Bourbon event with master distiller Brent Elliott Friday morning at the distillery. And Ryan Ashley told us there are no plans right now to cut back on the Four Roses presence at Bourbon Festival events in Bardstown. The Visitors Center will also remain open during the strike. Union President Jeff Royalty says his negotiators are ready to meet with management on an hour's notice this week to resume talks, but they are preparing to have their own presence at the Bourbon Festival.
My hope and prayer is that we rectify this problem and get it solved in a couple of days, but if not, you will see USCW Local 10D and friends at the Bourbon Festival. We've got such support from all the USCW guys, the NCFO guys, the Teamsters, the UAW, and just on and on. I've received calls from union members out of Detroit, Michigan, out of Columbus, Ohio. They're just wanting to come down and show support because these guys, they've either been through this or they know they could be next. And only thing that I can say is we want people to know this is not a personal vendetta against anybody. All we're wanting is to keep things fair. We respect the company we work for, and, we just want the respect back. And it kind of blows my mind. This day and age, most squabbles with company and unions revolve around money, and this is not one of those. It's just more of a respect, and it's kind of my question would be to the company is what happened? How did we get here all of a sudden? And because nothing would make me any happier than to be able to go in. If I could sign a contract now, I would go in and start the plan up tonight.
You can listen to the entire interview with Jeff Royalty in the news section at WhiskyCast.com, and we'll have much more on this coming up later on Behind the Label. There is one other note from the Bourbon Festival. The annual Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Fame induction luncheon usually kicks off the festival on Wednesday afternoon each year, but scheduling conflicts forced this year's luncheon to be moved to Friday at Louisville's Fraser History Museum. For the first time, tickets for the luncheon are available to the public through the Bourbon Festival's website. We'll have details on this year's Hall of Fame class this coming weekend on WhiskyCast. In other news, back in February, we broke the news first here on WhiskyCast that the legendary rock band Metallica was working on a new whiskey with veteran distiller Dave Pickerell.
I am being given some very nice poetic license. And, and as you would expect from a band with the artisanal bent that Metallica does, that they would want this to be a true artisanal product. And so we're having some fun.
The details are out now, and blackened American whiskey is on the shelves. It's a blend of whiskeys finished in black brandy barrels, then blasted with intense bass sound waves. The name for the whiskey comes from the first track of Metallica's 1988 album, And Justice for All, Blackened. Dave's not been available for interviews. He's on tour with the band right now, since the whiskey is being distributed in cities along the tour schedule. It's selling for around $53 a bottle. Meanwhile, one of Dave's other partners is Whistle Pig Rye, and they're out with the 5th edition of their Boss Hog whiskey. The Spirit of Mauve is a 13-year-old rye finished in Calvados casks. Mauve was one of the brand's first 2 spokespigs at Whistle Pig Farm in Vermont, and she died earlier this year. The whiskey will sell for around $500 a bottle. Now, Dave Pickerell stepped aside from his consulting work at George Washington's distillery at Mount Vernon a while back. But, of course, they are still making whiskey there, the same way it was done in Washington's final days. In fact, Mount Vernon's Steve Bayshore plans to fire up the stills later this fall and revive another one of the original Mount Vernon whiskey recipes, But this one will not be a rye whiskey.
Yeah, I've been looking into the historical record and realized that in the early batches that were done in 1797, Washington, like any farmer, is using what grains were available, and he indicates they used corn and wheat in some of the early batches before he had enough rye. So with that historical record there, I figured why not branch out a little out of our portfolio and make a bourbon. So my bosses have approved that, and this November we're going to start in and make the first George Washington bourbon.
Which will be a couple of years in the barrel?
I'm going to go 4 because I think having tasted younger bourbons, I want to make sure this comes off well. So we're going to go to 53-gallon barrels, and we're going to go 4 years minimum with it.
This could be interesting.
I'm really excited about it, and so is the team that work with me, my staff, and I think it's in line, really, when you think of George Washington, the businessman. He would have certainly launched into other things that he knew were profitable. And we all know how much bourbon is loved all over America and throughout the world. So tying Washington's history to this great spirit is going to be fun to do.
Until then, we'll have to settle for the distillery's first 4-year-old rye whiskey. It's selling for $225 a bottle at Mount Vernon, with all proceeds going to fund the estate's educational programs. Charities will also benefit from the sales of Ben Romach's latest release for the distillery's 20th anniversary. They have bottled the very first cask that was filled in August of 1988 when the distillery reopened. Prince Charles signed that cask a couple of months later when he visited the distillery, and proceeds from Ben Romach cask number 1 will go to some of the Prince's charities, along with charities selected by Gordon and MacPhail. Current distillery manager Keith Cruikshank helped fill that very first cask 20 years ago.
There was no pomp and ceremony. It was just myself and the manager, Bob Murray, and we also had a third gentleman there. Now, this gentleman came down a couple of weeks before, and this gentleman was the ex-customs officer. He was here when they closed the distillery in 1983. He was here and observed the very last filling, which was cask number 535 back in 1983. And he came down and he just said, would it be okay if I came and saw you filling spirit again here at Distillery? So we said, yes, just come down. So he came down, and there was just the 3 of us, and we just filled cask number 1. And I think for him, it was great for us. But for him, I think he thought that he would never see whiskey again being made here at Ben Romach. And he was so happy to see whiskey being made in Forest again. So there was a little bit of, it was just a quiet moment for the 3 of us. It was very good. No, it was just a very nice moment to see the distillery making whiskey again.
Cask number 1 will be sold only at the Ben Romach Visitors Centre in Forres, Scotland. The price, £1,000 a bottle. Remember, it's for charity. Meanwhile, let's go from 1 new release to 10. Diageo unveiled the 2018 special releases at a media tasting Wednesday night in New York City. We can talk right now about 9 out of the 10. As we heard from Diageo's Donald Colville earlier this year when the releases were announced, there's one mystery whiskey that will be unveiled this coming week. And for the first time, the series will not have releases from Port Ellen or Brora. Master blender Maureen Robinson led the team that created the 10 different whiskeys.
This year we've got quite a few firsts, where we've got an Inchgar 27-year-old, which we've never actually bottled as a special release before. And the other thing is we've actually got Carsbridge grain whisky this year as well. And 2 or 3 years ago we started introducing grain whisky into our special releases. And for me personally, that is almost like one of the hidden gems, because a lot of people just don't know what grain whisky tastes like, especially at that age. And to me, some of them are really classic.
Let's talk about that Carsbridge, because a 48-year-old Carsbridge is very special on its own and very rare.
Yes, it is. Carsbridge closed in 1983, and it's actually quite close to my heart because my office is actually on the site of Carsbridge. The actual distillery is no longer there, but I've still got an office there. And that's where a lot of these special releases, these special liquids are actually created there along with myself and the team. Each year, as I said, we look for something different, and we have great fun just looking at all different casks coming in and just bouncing ideas off one another, just what we're going to do for each year coming.
How far in advance do you start putting these together?
Well, we're actually started on next year's releases, and of course I can't say anything about them, but it really is it's exciting, because you bring in lots of samples and have a nose and taste at them, and really finding what we find is really, sometimes we look for something that's quirky, it's something that really is different, and sometimes it might not be the norm from what you'd expect from that distillery, but as I said earlier on, we reckon consumers are really looking, especially in this area, in this category, they're looking for something really different that they can really talk about.
Do you ever get distillery managers lobbying to have their whiskies put in?
Not always. Sometimes they will do, but again, it's really just us looking at the inventory. We're really looking at what stocks we've got and what's available for us to look at, and what we would think is what people would find exciting. So it's really just just looking for all these different casks, and it's not just the distilleries, it's also all the different kinds of wood that you can actually, it's been matured in, and that really is what brings it to light to the consumer as well, because you get all these fantastic flavours comes from a distillery and a different type of wood.
The 48-year-old Carsbridge single grain is the oldest in this year's series. It'll sell in the U.S. for around $960 a bottle, with a worldwide price of £750. There's also a 35-year-old Kalila at the upper end of the range, with a U.S. price of around $990 and a global price of £675. I'll have tasting notes for a couple of these whiskeys later on, and you'll find my tasting notes for the entire series at WhiskyCast.com. We'll also have details on that mystery whiskey next time around. The Glenrothes is undergoing a major shakeup in its range of single malts. Vintages are out for the first time since 1993, and age statements are in. The new Solio collection replaces all of the current Glenrothes expressions. There are 5 new bottlings to start with: 10, 12, 18, and 25-year-old whiskeys, along with the no-age statement Whiskey Maker's Cut edition. That one will be bottled at 48.8% ABV. The 10 and 12-year-olds will be bottled at 40%, while the older editions will be bottled at 43% ABV. Prices will range from £37 in the UK for the 10-year-old, around $48 US, to £375 for the 25-year-old. That converts to around $485 a bottle. However, U.S. pricing and availability has not been announced yet. There will also be a 40-year-old Glenrothes coming early next year. And Compass Box is adding its first new permanent addition to the range in the last 5 years. The Story of the Spaniard is a blended malt that brings together malts matured in ex-sherry casks with malts from ex-Spanish wine casks. It'll sell for £50 a bottle in the UK and $65 in the US. There's also a new release of the Flaming Heart blended malt, which combines heavily peated Islay malt whiskey with malts matured in heavily toasted French oak barrels. It's the first release of Flaming Heart since 2015 and is available now in Europe for around £120 a bottle. It'll hit the U.S. this month with a recommended retail price of $150 a bottle. And for the first time, 800 Magnum-sized bottles of Flaming Heart will be available. 1.5-liter bottles will be available in Europe for £250 each, and 1.75-liter bottles will sell in the U.S. for $330 each. And finally, while we're speaking of flames, we've got to share this story with you. Eric Smith is one of the production workers at Highland Park on Orkney. He and his wife Dawn recently bought a brand new BMW and left it parked outside their home in Kirkwall last Saturday night. In the middle of the night, Eric woke up smelling smoke, looked outside and found the car completely engulfed in flames. Firefighters put out the fire, and police were looking through the wreckage when they found something inside. You see, Eric had brought home a case of 6 bottles of Highland Park 12-year-old from the distillery. Turns out that not only did all 6 bottles survive the fire intact, but so did the boxes, with just some minor scorching. Turns out that was all that could be salvaged from the car. Eric and Dawn gave one of the bottles to the firefighters as a thank you. And they may have to give one to the insurance agent, too, as a down payment on the deductible for replacing the BMW. No word yet on what caused that car to catch fire in the first place. You can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long at WhiskyCast.com. The news is brought to you by Highland Park, the Orkney single malt with Viking soul. Now, we're not encouraging you to see whether your bottle of Highland Park could withstand a car fire, but if you're sitting around a campfire with some friends, Highland Park's new Valknut single malt might just warm things up even more. It's the latest edition in the Valhalla collection, and you can find out more at HighlandParkWhiskey.com. Time now for the WhiskyCast calendar of events. Beam opens its Bourbon Legends Boxcar Tour this Wednesday and Thursday in Denver, Colorado. The Whiskey Extravaganza kicks off its fall series of festivals this coming Thursday night in New York City, while the Whiskey X is Friday night in Austin, Texas. The Midlands Whiskey Festival is this coming Saturday in Birmingham, England. Bourbon and Beyond takes over Louisville's Champions Park on the 22nd and 23rd. We'll have special coverage from Louisville that weekend right here on WhiskyCast. That weekend is also Whiskey Live in Paris, the Whiskey by the Sea Festival in Vlissingen, the Netherlands, the Liverpool Whiskey Festival in England, and 40 Creek Distillery's annual Whiskey Weekend in Grimsby, Ontario. The Franklin Institute in Philadelphia hosts Speakeasy Science in its Science After Hours series on September 25th. And tickets are still available for the Whiskey Show in London, September 28th through the 30th. Right now, we have 228 different events around the world on our searchable calendar at WhiskyCast.com. Just click the search button to find one near you.
This is whiskey. Johnny Walker's Scotch whiskey, from this place and these places in that place. These are the people that make it, aging in oak for 12 long years. See, the land that shapes these people and the people that shape this whiskey all shape how bloody good it tastes. Bold as it is complex, for every step you take, this is Johnny Walker Black Label, friends. Step right up.
Can I drink this now?
Johnny Walker Black Label Blended Scotch Whiskey, 40% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Lagavulin. We've been following the story of Wyoming whiskey for years now here on WhiskyCast, going back to the very first bottling run in the fall of 2012, and the day those bottles went on sale in Kirby, Wyoming on December 1st of that year. But I have to admit that even we were surprised to see the announcement Thursday that Wyoming Whiskey's founders, Brad and Kate Mead, and their longtime friend and former law partner, David DeFazio, had entered into a strategic partnership with Edrington. Over the last 6 years, Wyoming Whiskey has expanded its reach beyond the state's borders. It was becoming more widely available around the U.S. and making some inroads in Western Canada, too. Nationwide distribution in the U.S. is sort of the holy grail for all U.S. small-scale distillers, and getting to that point is almost impossible without forming an alliance with a larger partner, in this case, Edrington, the owner of the Macallan, Highland Park, the Glenrothes, and the famous Grouse whiskies, just to name a few. We'll hear from Edrington America's CEO Chris Spalding in a few minutes, but first, let's start with my conversation shortly after the announcement with Wyoming Whiskey's David DeFazio. Give me the genesis for this deal. How did this all come about? Because I don't think anybody had any idea that you were talking with Edrington.
We have been approached by a number of companies over the last, 3 years, and through those discussions, some of them petered out quickly, some of them have gone farther, and the level of interest has varied widely. And Edrington came to us a couple years ago. I met them actually through an introduction by Kevin Roberts at Breakthrough, and it came after the Shank and Impact seminar that I attended in New York City, which was a very profitable conference for us. And Edrington, we've just had continuing conversations with them over the last 2 years, and they have been very stand-up, upfront folks who have done everything they said they were going to do and have kept to a timeline that they represented early on. And I'm glad ultimately that we were able to reach today, because this is the best day in Wyoming Whiskey's history. And I couldn't be more excited about the partnership and where we're heading next.
Give me a sense of what this partnership entails.
First and foremost, it opens up the sales and distribution network that Edrington has to Wyoming Whiskey. And that has been the greatest challenge that we have faced in the last few years, and that is trying to get our product distributed in an effective and efficient manner. And just like so many small distillers in the country, we've had that problem. And it's just a matter of, the market, it is what it is. And, big brands command more attention because of what they bring to the table. And we have not been able to do that. So with Edrington and being aligned with their family of whiskeys and rum and tequila and vodka, we could now command more attention from distributors. And we're thrilled about that, because now we'll be able to offer Wyoming whiskey to folks in every neighborhood across the country.
Do you have enough whiskey to do that?
We do. I think that with the growth that may occur, we will need more, but that will just mean we'll have to be on allocation in markets as we expand our production here in Wyoming. We will not be buying or sourcing any whiskey from anywhere else. We're still going to make all of our products out of Wyoming grains with Wyoming water in Kirby. Sam Mead is, continuing as our distiller and is going to keep making great whiskey.
But this also gives you access to their resources and expertise as well, right?
Absolutely. The history that they have within their companies, dating back to 1798 with Island Park, these guys know how to make whiskey, and our ears are wide open to take any and all suggestions they may have on refinements to our process and, innovation, which is something that I've always been interested in, would be a natural next step. What can we do that would make sense for us as we look into the next 3 to 5 years?
But they've never made a bourbon before.
No, they haven't. And, that's an exciting thing for them. In my conversations with them, I know they've been wanting to get into the American whiskey category, and it's a crowded market. And we are honored beyond belief to be chosen by them to be their first and maybe only step into the American whiskey category. I couldn't ask for a better partner. And, Brad and Kate and I have looked at this, and we've evaluated all sorts of different opportunities, and we couldn't ask for a better partner. These guys are aligned with us culturally. The fact that they're owned by a charitable trust is something that was very attractive to us. The fact that they are so committed to quality at every step along the way with whiskey production is something that is to be envied. And we do the same thing, but we're young, and the ability to learn from them and to develop our current products into even better products, to learn about their wood programs and all of that is, at this point, it's, pardon the pun, but it's intoxicating to think about everything that lies ahead for us.
Well, I have to ask the million-dollar question here. Is Edrington taking an equity stake in the distillery?
Mark, I'd love to talk to you more about that, but I'm not at liberty to say, discuss the details of the strategic partnership. I guess I would like, for the moment at least, just to say that Wyoming Whiskey, it will still be run by Wyoming Whiskey here in Wyoming, and you're not going to see any massive, quick changes. Just to reiterate what I said before, this is a true strategic partnership where we both gain a lot from this, and it'll now open up some resources for Wyoming Whiskey to do sales and marketing efforts that we were unable to do before.
Does this also open up export possibilities into Europe and other markets where Edrington works?
I think that is on the horizon. The immediate plan is to open up the nation to Wyoming Whiskey, and that's going to be what we tackle first. And the second step, once that is accomplished to a level where everyone, are on the team and on the joint board, says, yes, we've accomplished that, I think that global distribution would be the next step. But I don't know when that would happen. That could happen in a couple of years. It could be beyond that. We need to make sure that we have enough product to adequately supply the markets that we will be in first.
Are you happy about this? Is this something that you guys had really wanted to do, or did you see a point where this was going to become inevitable?
We're thrilled. When we started this, Mark, you know us inside and out. You've been with us from the beginning, and we set out to make America's next great bourbon. And we've been working towards that goal from the beginning, and never did we say, we're building this company to sell it. That just simply hasn't been a goal of ours. But I think we've achieved a level of excellence with our whiskey now that drew some attention, and we were more than happy to entertain any and all options. And I think as we grew, we just take this one step at a time. The one hurdle that we faced that we were having a tough time getting past is the distribution element. And how do we handle that with limited resources? And so the opportunity to partner with a company like Edrington that has one of the best sales and marketing networks in the country and one of the most respected portfolios is something that would be hard to pass up for anybody in our shoes, anybody at all, actually. And so it became very appealing once we realized the opportunities that would be afforded us once the partnership was forged.
And that's a problem that a lot of small-scale distillers have, is getting that product the last step into the market.
Absolutely. And, I talked to a handful of distillers routinely, and, that's the one. That's the big step. Once you are making a good product, you're now stepping into a world of crowded shelves and, really difficult entry money. I mean, it requires so many resources to get that attention. And, we've thought of all options, of how we could take the next step. And the one that made the most sense was a strategic partnership.
This deal is the latest in a series of tie-ups between small-scale U.S. distillers and larger spirits companies over the last 3 years. That list includes Bacardi's 2015 purchase of Angel's Envy, along with Constellation Brands, which acquired High West outright in 2016 and bought a minority stake in Catoctin Creek Distillery. 2016 also brought Westland Whiskey's sale to Remy Cointreau and Pernod Ricard's deal for Smooth Ambler. And last year, we saw Moet Hennessy acquire Woodinville Whiskey and William Grant & Sons buy out Tuttletown Spirits. Now, Edrington wasn't outwardly trolling around with a checkbook looking for deals, but Edrington America's CEO Chris Spalding had backing from Scotland to pursue a deal that made sense. Why did you guys decide to work with Wyoming? I don't think anybody had any thought that Edrington Americas was interested in getting into the bourbon business.
Well, I think, we really have become concrete about our vision and our view, and the rest of our range has really been premiumizing. We've been doing a number of different things and sticking along with what consumers are after today. And they're after really credible products that have heritage and have a genuineness and authenticity. And that's what made us interested in expanding out. And we were really brought together on the people front first, between us and Wyoming. And they're really great people with the same value set we have about giving back to society over the long term. And that's where the discussion began, really. And then as we progressed, understanding their liquid and the direction it was going and the quality of the product they were starting to put out, we were just like a match made in heaven at that point.
Give me your sense of how this deal is going to work going forward. The release wasn't clear on it, but I have read in other outlets that this is a minority stake that Edrington Americas is taking in Wyoming whiskey, with you guys having control over the distribution, sales, and marketing going forward, but the Mead family and David DeFazio will continue to make the whiskey in Kirby and basically continue doing what they do best while you guys do what you do best and sell the stuff.
Well, I think that's entirely accurate, Mark. And I think the great part is we went through relatively early on in this process and went through ways of working and kind of divided, hey, could Edrington do this? Can Wyoming do this? And the stuff in the middle to talk about. There was virtually nothing left in the middle. And I wouldn't say that it's as black and white as we'll solely do the marketing and they'll solely do the production. I think we really want their input on how we market the brand and what the special releases in the future might look like and what the range might look like. They have a big input to do there. And I think on the operational side, while they're going to be involved absolutely making the whiskey, I think there's a lot we can leverage from other distilleries to make sure that we're making the best possible product. And if I take that one thing further, I think if we pride ourselves in the background as having a really exquisite knowledge on casks and what they can do for your products, and I think that's something we can bring to the Meads and to David DeFazio and to Wyoming Whiskey.
And obviously Sam is going to stay on as the head distiller, and I'm assuming that Nancy Fraley is going to stay on as their blending consultant. Is that fair to say from your end?
I think at this point it absolutely is. I think Sam's engagement is really important. I think to have that family piece involved over the long term matters a lot to us. If you were to parallel this with Brugal, where we have a majority stake in Brugal, it's still the Brugal family today making the whiskey and really partnering with us across the board on all aspects of the business. And I just view this as a very similar arrangement.
The other thing it does for you guys is give you another source of good ex-bourbon casks for your distilleries in Scotland and Brugal as well, right?
100%. And that's a great catch. I think they're using some really nice casks, and I think when they're done with them, they have high potential to do great things for our single malt. So that's definitely an opportunity for us in the future as well.
What was so attractive about the bourbon market to Edrington that made you want to get in? Had you been looking for bourbon acquisitions for a while, or was it just this one deal that made sense?
A little more of the latter. I think, there's discussions all the time. There's a lot of great innovation out there and a lot of great entrepreneurialism. And a lot of things come at me all the time. And this one just stuck out. And it stuck out because of, we talk about great people leading brands giving more. And it ticked the boxes in all level. And I think wanting to have relationships with people first to make great brands and great products is where we start. And that's why Wyoming stood out. So were we out there on a bourbon exploration process, really hardcore? No. Are we open-minded and aware of where the categories are going? 100%.
What happens now that you've closed the deal?
Well, I think we take a really, really short, deep breath, celebrate a little, and then we sit down and really plan the future of stock laydown, do all the right quality things, think about how we allocate this product because it's going to be highly allocated, and how we make sure that the right consumers are aware of this product and the quality of this product today.
I'm assuming you've been out to the distillery, right?
I have on a few occasions.
What'd you think the first time you drove down that dirt road over the railroad tracks and saw the Kirby Population 92 sign, and then saw the distillery in the background?
So I thought it was awesome. And I guess, being a Canadian living in New York, I can, at a different scale, I can relate to that as well. And it really hit home, and thought it was really special. And there was a specialist there that I can parallel from my personal life, but I can also parallel it to Highland Park. Another of our brands, in a lot of ways, a favorite brand that's so ingrained in the community and can only be made what it is there because of the history, heritage, and the people. And I look at them as great parallels to one another.
So did you get to go out on the ranch at all?
I have been out on the ranch. I think it just adds to the magic. My background, I spent some time not on proper ranches, but on farms, doing some work. So I volunteered to help out whenever I can as well.
So you've been out to Jackson and seen the ranch and done a little shoveling hay and things like that out there with Brad and Kate?
Well, I've explored the ranch, and I understand the work demand. Unfortunately, I haven't shown up at the right time of year when they're looking for an all-hands-on-deck standpoint, but I suspect that'll be their board meeting planning process to make sure those dates line up with when the most work's to be done.
Anything else you can add I didn't ask about?
Mark, I think those of us who were working on the project and working on the deal understood the people and had an amazing amount of enthusiasm. You hope that others in your organization and your community will have that enthusiasm. And then when you announce it to the wider audience and they exceed your expectation on enthusiasm, you just sit back and smile. And whether it's our distributor partners in the U.S. but around the globe who've reached out, whether it's our staff in the U.S., our staff in Mexico, our staff across Europe, our staff in Asia, I mean, the level of interest and enthusiasm is through the roof. So really, that's just a great place to be starting out from. And the Meads and David are wonderful people. So I just couldn't be happier. And, if I reflect on our other brand partners of smaller brands, whether it's Steven Sparrow on Snow Leopard or the team on Partita, also really great people, Gary Shansby on Partita, that partner with us really, really well, have the same ambition, have the same passion and the same want. It just seems like a great fit to the family to bring the Meads and David into that community.
It'll take some time to see whether this deal and those that came before it work out to the benefit of both sides. But there is a lesson for other small distillers who might have their hearts set on a similar deal. You'd better get the quality of the whiskey right first. All of the deals we've seen so far have focused on the quality of the whiskey as much as whether the numbers made sense. That's WhiskyCast In-Depth, brought to you by Lagavulin, the legendary Islay single malt. Look for the classic Lagavulin 16-year-old, the Distiller's Edition, and the throwback 8-year-old Lagavulin at a whiskey shop near you. Find out more at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery. Let's start off with the second release of Wyoming Whiskey's Barrel Strength Bourbon. The first release came 3 years ago, and you'll find my tasting notes for it at whiskycast.com. The 2018 edition is bottled at 62.35% ABV. And the nose has dry spices, balanced by honey, toffee, caramel, and just a touch of charred oak. The taste starts off sweet with honey, burnt caramel, and toasted vanilla. Then the spices come alive with hints of cinnamon, allspice, and chili powder that are assertive without overpowering the sweetness underneath. There's excellent balance and complexity here. The finish is long but gentle with lingering touches of charred oak, toasted vanilla, burnt caramel, and honey. I'm scoring the 2018 edition of Wyoming Whiskey Barrel Strength a 95. Now, the strike at Four Roses is not expected to halt plans for the 130th anniversary limited edition small batch to go on sale this coming Saturday at the Distillery in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky, and the gift shop at Cox's Creek near Bardstown. I received a sample recently. It's bottled at 54.2% ABV and comes from 4 different Four Roses recipes, matured for between 10 and 16 years. The nose has a good balance of sweetness and spice with honey, caramel, toasted oak, allspice, and just a hint of butterscotch. The taste is light and fruity, with red apples and peaches at first, followed by spicy notes of allspice and black pepper with honey and butterscotch in the background. The finish is long and dry with dried fruits, honey, and just a hint of spice. I'm scoring the 130th Anniversary Limited Edition Small Batch from Four Roses a 93. And here's hoping both sides in the labor dispute there can come to an agreement very soon. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute, but first, our tasting notes are brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery, proud to announce the 2018 edition of Parker's Heritage Collection. This year's edition carries on Parker Beam's legacy of excellence and innovation with a unique bourbon finished in orange curacao barrels that accent the bourbon's own natural hints of citrus. Once again, sales of this year's edition of the Parker's Heritage Collection will benefit the ALS Association. Find out more at heavenhilldistillery.com. Think wisely, drink wisely. Now, let's look at a couple of the whiskeys from the 2018 Diageo Special Releases series that I tasted the other night in New York City. Maureen Robinson told us about the Carsbridge 48-year-old single grain and her personal connection to the distillery's history earlier. This one is bottled at 43.2% ABV. The nose is fruity and floral with hints of citrus, dried flowers, and vanilla. It's delicate and complex with just a hint of oak despite its age. The taste is tart and fruity with lemon zest, grapefruit, vanilla, and muted spices for a vibrant and luscious flavor leading into a long finish. I'm scoring the Carsbridge 48-year-old single grain a 93. Now, depending on where you live, you're probably not going to be happy with me for telling you about this one. That's because the Talisker 8-year-old is one of the 3 releases in this year's series that will not be sold in the U.S. It'll have a price in the UK of around £70 a bottle. That's about $90 in the U.S. And it's bottled at 59.4% ABV after 8 years in first fill ex-bourbon hogsheads. The nose has a good balance of oak and spice, with hints of allspice and nutmeg, a slight earthiness with touches of garden soil and sautéed mushrooms, and just a bit of grilled fruits. The taste is dry and woody at first, followed by an explosion of black peppercorns that fades away slowly to reveal honey and toffee notes. And the finish is very long with lingering spices. I really, really wish this one was coming to the U.S. I'm scoring the Talisker 8-year-old a 93. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery. I'm adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of nearly 2,300 whiskeys from around the world at WhiskyCast.com.
Redbreast fans have always cherished our whiskey's sherry notes, so we set out to embellish that character. Introducing the Redbreast Listowel edition, a quintessential single pot still Irish whiskey finished in first fill Oloroso sherry casks from Spain's prestigious Bodegas Listowel. Carrying Redbreast's trademark pot still spices and dark dried fruit notes, the Listowel edition is graced with an enduring sherry finish that would be better described as a final act. Discover the newest branch on the Redbreast family tree.
I have a challenge for you this week. We have some exciting changes in the works here at WhiskyCast that we're going to share with you in the coming weeks. Our goal is first and always to increase the amount of quality and journalistically sound whiskey content we provide here on WhiskyCast, but we need your help to reach your fellow whiskey lovers. All you have to do this week is find a whiskey-loving friend or a colleague, pry that smartphone or tablet out of their trembling fingers for a minute, and show them how to use the Podcasts app and find WhiskyCast for them. Even better, show them the subscribe link and how it'll let their device download every new episode of WhiskyCast as soon as it's ready. All for free. If you're an Android user, Google has just released its own podcast app, especially for Android devices, and you'll find all of our podcasts there. Of course, we're also on Apple Podcasts and iTunes, along with Spotify and most other podcast apps. We'll be celebrating our 13th anniversary of WhiskyCast in a couple of months, and we want to continue to be the worldwide leader in whiskey podcasts, but we need your help to do it. Thanks for your support. Let's open up the inbox now for the What I'm Tasting This Week department. It's brought to you by Lot 40. I posted a photo on social media the other night from the Diageo Special Releases media tasting, and Scotchology1 on Twitter had this comment. Not a bad way to spend an evening. Can't wait to hear your impressions. I'm sorry, I don't do impressions. On that note, Whiskey Ranker on Twitter asked this question, and fortunately I was just one of several people asked to answer it. Help! Google shows two different camps on pulling a vacuum to preserve. One says pull a vacuum to prevent oxidation, and one says no to preserve the vapor pressures. But I don't see any tests to compare. Well, I'm the wrong person to ask this question to because I pull a vacuum in my office every couple of days, but I also push it too. It's an Oreck upright vacuum. Does wonders on the dog hair. But as for whiskey, the idea here would be to prevent oxidation after a bottle has been opened. I've never had any problems with oxidation, but others recommend using inert gas dispensers that are usually sold for use with wines. Now, I am not going to make any jokes about being inert most of the time, or being full of gas. My family takes care of that joking on a regular basis. We had Fred Minnick on the show a couple of weeks ago, and mentioned back then that I was on standby to fill in for Fred later this month at Bourbon and Beyond in Louisville if his wife Jacqueline were to have their second child that weekend. Well, there's no need for that now. Jacqueline and Fred welcomed their second son, Julian Joseph Minnick, into the world this week. And before you make the connection, they did not pick the name Julian in honor of Julian Pappy Van Winkle. Jacqueline and big brother Oscar picked the name out on their own. Now, Fred posted on Twitter that Jacqueline had two requests, a bottle of Booker's and this year's Old Forester birthday bourbon. However, Fred tweeted this on Saturday. As I install the car seat for Julie and Joseph's trip home, I hear a crunch. I checked the trunk, and the bag holding Jacqueline's celebration bourbon had broken glass. The Old Forester birthday bourbon shattered to pieces. Not sure I have the heart to tell her. Damn. But we send our congratulations anyway to Fred, Jacqueline, and Oscar. Finally, at Whiskey Freedom from the Hampton Manor Inn in Arden, England, sent this tweet the other day. Am devouring your podcast. Thank you. Next time you're in the UK, drop by for a dram of this, #OnTheHouse, along with a photo of Gordon and MacPhail's 1973 Longmorn Single Malt, bottled in 2015. Thanks for the offer. I have had the chance to taste that one once before, and my tasting notes for it are on the WhiskyCast website, but I'll never turn down a chance to taste it again. However, if anyone comes by the inn now looking for that dram and claiming to be me, make sure you check their ID first, okay? If you have something you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, well, you can always post it on the Your Voice page at whiskycast.com or track us down on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Tumblr at WhiskyCast, and the email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Your Voice is presented by Lot 40, Canada's award-winning 100% pot still rye whiskey. Lot 40, unapologetically Canadian. please drink responsibly. Let's wrap up the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and other things that make whiskey unique. The Four Roses distillery strike that started Friday is the second one targeting a Kentucky bourbon distillery in the last couple of years. The United Food and Commercial Workers staged a week-long strike at the Jim Beam Distillery in Claremont and the Booker No Distillery in Boston back in October of 2016. That strike ended when workers accepted a new contract that included pay increases and limits on overtime work. Heaven Hill workers did consider a strike in 2016, but voted in favor of a new contract without walking off the job. Until then, though, the bourbon industry had had pretty good relationships between distillery owners and the unions representing their workers since the 80s. That wasn't always the case, though. Kentucky has a long history of labor conflicts, mostly in the coal industry, and that extended to the whiskey industry in the 60s and early 70s. Fred Minnick outlines some of those strikes at his website, including a decade-long series of conflicts at the Stitzel-Weller Distillery in Louisville under the Van Winkle family's management during the 60s. And in 1971, a federal judge blocked Brown-Forman workers from going out on strike. The United Food and Commercial Workers is the largest union representing distillery workers in Kentucky, but the Teamsters also represents some distillery workers, primarily at Brown-Forman. And as we're seeing in the Four Roses strike, there are smaller unions such as the National Conference of Firemen and Oilers, part of the SEIU. Those smaller unions represent specialized trades such as the boiler and water treatment plant workers at Four Roses. We had a comment after the strike started from Smoking Man at CGB Spender 8874 on Twitter. It'll be interesting to see if this migrates to other distilleries. Well, the odds are very much against that happening, and here's why. First, Four Roses is Kirin's only distillery in Kentucky, meaning Kirin negotiates its own contract with its unions, just like each other distillery owner does. Those deals are usually about 5 years long and don't usually take a macro view at negotiating time. In other words, the unions do not take contracts elsewhere in the industry and use them as a pattern for negotiating with other distillers. Now, this so-called pattern bargaining is common in other industries. For years, the United Auto Workers would pick one target automaker at contract time, negotiate their best deal with that company, then use it as the basis for talks with the other U.S. automakers. What you might see, though, is union workers from other distilleries showing up at the Four Roses picket line in solidarity, but their contracts would not allow them to go on strike industry-wide. If you have something you'd like us to look at on Behind the Label, just use the contact form at WhiskyCast.com to get in touch with us. That's also where you'll find links for our WhiskyCast Tasting Panel podcast and our WhiskyCast HD videos, along with the latest whiskey news, events, cocktail recipes, photos, and much more, along with a complete archive of our past episodes all the way back to 2005. Our cask strength conversation continues all week long on social media. Look for us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Tumblr. And our email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
This is whiskey, Johnny Walker's Scotch whiskey, from this place and these people, aye, Scotch makers, creating the bold and complex flavour of Johnny Walker Black Label. Step right up.
WhiskyCast, brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2018, and comes to you each week from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.